Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez. I represent the 7th Congressional District in New York, and I'm a proud Puerto Rican American. Thank you all for being here this morning. More than 10 weeks after Maria made landfall in Puerto Rico, the island remains a state of devastation. 1/3 of the island remains without power. I was in my hometown of Yabucoa this weekend, where Maria made landfall. Today, the town looks like the storm hit yesterday, not 2 months ago. People are still standing in line for food and water. The federal government has failed 3.5 million American citizens with its response. For decades, Puerto Rico has been a failed economic laboratory experiment, and the policies implemented here in this body have brought the island to its knees. Now, with the potential passage of the Republican tax scam bill, Puerto Rico faces an economic hurricane caused right here in the halls of Congress. Under U.S. tax law, American companies located in Puerto Rico have traditionally been considered controlled foreign corporations. This continues to be the case under the Republican tax bill. But under this bill, American subsidiaries operating in Puerto Rico will now face a 20% tax when they move their goods off the island. If this becomes law, you can expect to see more than 200,000 manufacturing jobs disappear from the island. And the government of Puerto Rico could lose 1/3 of its revenue. Just like so many times before, the fault lies right here in Congress. We must now need to look in the mirror. It is us, Congress, not the people of Puerto Rico. We have seen this movie before. The treatment of the island under Medicaid, Medicare, and various tax policies such as Section 936. And now, the tax scam. It is Congress that created the dire economic situation the island finds itself in. Since Maria, more than 215,000 Puerto Ricans, American citizens, have left to the mainland for Florida and New York. Imagine how the exodus will accelerate if Puerto Rico's manufacturing base is further damaged. In addition to its many other problems, under the Republican tax scam bill, Puerto Rico is treated like a foreign country. A foreign country. I can assure you that if we face another conflict around the world, Puerto Ricans will be treated as part of the mainland. Once again, Puerto Rico will suffer because policies enacted in this body, the U.S. Congress. And eventually, this tax scam will mean gutting services that all Americans need, like Medicare and Medicaid, services Puerto Rico especially needs following Maria. Puerto Rico's Medicaid shortfall was a looming threat before the hurricane. After Maria, this issue is even more pressing. Congress must also raise the federal Medicaid matching rate for Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands to 100%. This was done for some states after Katrina, and that should happen here too. In the long term, the tax scam will mean less investment in education for young people. Close to 60% of the children in Puerto Rico live in poverty. 60% of children in Puerto Rico live in poverty. The island schools were struggling before Maria. Now many have opened without electric power. Some have mold putting children at risk for respiratory problems. Enrollment is down. You're going to hear Puerto Rican educators today who can talk about these challenges. You know, at this time of year, as the holidays approach, most Americans are inspired to care for one another, to give to charities and be more generous to the less fortunate. Yet, rather than caring for those suffering in Puerto Rico, congressional Republicans are turning their back on our fellow citizens. Rather than provide meaningful relief, they want to push through a tax cut for the biggest corporation and the most wealthy. And they are doing it on the backs of the most vulnerable, in this case, American citizens in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. That's immoral, it's heartless, it's wrong. And we are going to call them out on it, and we are going to keep fighting until Puerto Rico is made whole. With that, let me introduce someone who has been a strong voice on this topic, our Democratic whip, Steny Hoyer.
I am pleased to join my friend Nydia Velázquez and so many others who are here who are going to speak up. Today we will have a vote. That will be a vote on delaying action, on delaying responsibility for the sole purpose of not working on help for Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, for not helping on numerous other issues that will be important to the American people tomorrow. But we will vote on a delay so that the Republican majority can work on its tax bill. A bill that, as Nydia Velázquez has just indicated, advantages the best off in America to the disadvantage of those less well off. Puerto Ricans were already facing a serious fiscal crisis before the natural disasters of Irma on September 9th and Maria on September 20th. We cannot responsibly address the island's recovery and help rebuild stronger than before without taking into account the effects of the dangerous tax bill that will adversely affect the people of Puerto Rico. How ironic that we are not giving the aid and assistance that is needed, but on the other hand, and Mr. Neal, I'm sure, will speak to this, we are damaging the people of Puerto Rico through the tax bill. Their tax legislation will make it harder for Puerto Rico to emerge stronger from the storms and get its fiscal house in order. The Republican tax legislation also excludes critical tax incentives to help with storm recovery, which is a shame, because Puerto Ricans living on the island and the Virgin Islands need all the tools we can provide, as we did for Hurricanes Katrina and Sandy. Let us not treat our brothers and sisters in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands disparately. We are one nation united. Our fellow Americans in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands continue to face desperate shortages of clean water some 2 months after the storms hit in the richest country on the face of the earth. Schools are closed and only 68% of island residents have had their power restored. 3 months after the storm. This Republican tax bill only makes things worse. And that is the reason, and the only reason, they want another 2 weeks. They've had 90 days to address this issue. 90 days since the middle of September, and they have not acted. Further delay is unjustified, which is why you will see Democrats voting against further delay. We will continue to raise our voices on behalf of the 3.6 million American citizens, Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, who are struggling to put their lives back together. You mentioned the season. This is the season. The time is now to make sure that we make our Puerto Rican brothers and sisters and our Virgin Islanders whole. The Trump administration should join in demanding that we take action. And with Republicans in Congress imposing additional challenges on them, our Puerto Rican and Virgin Island brothers and sisters are struggling and think we do not care. Let us send a message of care, of help, and of urgency. Thank you very much, Nidhi.
Thank you, Stan. And now we'll hear from our caucus chair, Joe Crowley.
Thank you, Nidhi. Let me thank Steny Hoyer and Richard-Neal, who certainly is the ranking member of the Ways and Means Committee, has done an outstanding job of bringing to light the inequities within this overall bill. But in particular, let me thank Nidia Velazquez and Jose Serrano, two stalwarts when it comes to the issue of Puerto Rico. You know, there's not a moment I think I sit down with Joe Serrano in the back of the chamber where he's not reminding me about the inequities of how unfairly the territories have been historically treated. And this tax bill is just another example of that distortion, of how unfairly the island of Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, are being treated in the wake of this Hurricane Maria. I had the opportunity to visit Puerto Rico just a few short weeks ago, and I was there on a bipartisan trip. But what has become very evident to me is the cosmetic concern that my Republican colleagues bring to this. On the face, they are very concerned. They express sorrow and concern of the loss of life and the deprivation that exists on the island of Puerto Rico as well as the Virgin Islands. But when you remove the cosmetics, their actions speak louder than their words. This bill is a reflection of their values. In the mid-1970s, when New York was down on its heels, Washington, D.C., then President Ford said to New York, drop dead. And we've been focusing so much on the president. We remember him tossing toilet paper into a crowd. We know of how he spoke about the Puerto Rican people in particular as being, in essence, lazy, not responsible enough because they let their debt get ahead of them. I've made note of historical reference to my own ancestral homeland of Ireland. The same thing was said about them during the years of the famine. Nothing more moved towards Irish independence than what happened 170 years ago. And in essence, what's happening here today, it's not just the president. It's the Congress. It's the House of Representatives, Republican-controlled House and Senate, who produced this bill that will impose a 20% excise tax on products manufactured and sent to the mainland. Can we imagine if Massachusetts put an excise tax on things coming from New York? Oh, I know you have. I was going to use New Jersey, but Richie was here. I used it instead. How outrageous that would be. Yet, when it comes to Puerto Rico, not even a hint of outrage. They had an opportunity in this bill to extend the earned income tax credit to Puerto Rico. It was not done. They had the opportunity to also to equalize the child tax credit. That was not done. And we offered these ideas and suggestions, and they were rejected. This, in essence, is not just Donald Trump. It is the Republican Congress saying to the people of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, drop dead during this holiday season. It's disgusting.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. And now let's hear from Congressman Richard-Neal, who is the ranking member of the House Ways and Means.
Thanks, Nydia. Thank you. More than anything else, the tax bill is just a missed opportunity. And conventional economics will always say, and by the way, I embrace conventional economics, we used to work around here, and that was the idea in an economic downturn. You did two things. You cut taxes, you increase spending. So the mainland is in an opposite vein. The economy is doing fairly well, so you don't need the tax cuts that are being proposed here, but you do need them on the island. So instead, the opposite tack is being taken by saying that we're going to impose a 20% excise tax on those products, coupled with the tax on intellectual property. coupled with a tax on domestic manufacturing in the island, this is about the American family. And as Joe correctly noted here, this is the chance to extend the earned income tax credit to single filers. That would go a long way toward helping out. But in this devastation, there's an opportunity to rebuild that island, to address labor participation rates, to address the issue of investment from the mainland. And on the debate on the House floor, I've got a few sore points in my career that has been lengthy here. But when I was debating the other side, one of them said, as I was challenging them on the lack of an adequate response and a meager investment, the individual responded to me by saying, oh, this is a down payment. A down payment on food and water? You treat it as, no, you get all the food and the water you can. And that's how it's handled. And then we can have a discussion afterwards about rebuilding. So there's a chance here for us to really have done something grand. And I hope that when we get to this conference committee, because I intend to make the argument inside of the conference committee for assistance to Puerto Rico and to the Virgin Islands. And, you know, for Nydia and Jose that are here, and Luis and others that have been such good friends to me inside of the House and outside of the House as well, it's a reminder that in my own constituency, 200 students have enrolled in the Springfield Public Schools. And proportionately, I think a number have enrolled in the Holyoke Public Schools. And for all of us, one of the problems in this migration off the island is that if we just have a population that's older, you lose the talent of the next generation that's coming along. They're the ones that you want to keep on the island because they tend to be the ones that come up with the new ideas for investment and for purpose. So I intend to do what the advocates like Nydia and Jose want and Joe continually. But I want to, just another, on a personal note, in the neighborhood where our Puerto Rican community live, one of the things that's fascinating about them is the entrepreneurship. It's really, I mean, those strip malls are all full. Banks, bakeries, small shops. And that's the spirit, I think, that we ought to be rewarding on the island of Puerto Rico. So we intend fully to try to get through this, but I intend to make that argument vigorously on behalf of Puerto Rico for investment and incentives, and let's use this devastation as an opportunity to rebuild that island.
Thank you. Thank you. Richard, we are counting on you as one of the conferees on this tax bill or tax scam. So now we're going to have our Congressman Jose Serrano.
Thank you, Nydia, and thank you to all of you for joining us today. We're here once again to call on Congress to act quickly to help Puerto Rico recover from Hurricane Maria. The administration has done too little and asked for even less to help the island. We are here to say that more must be done and done soon. As a member of the Appropriations Committee, I continue to fight to make sure Puerto Rico gets the funds that it needs. Unlike what the administration wants, we cannot wait for some future bill. We need comprehensive recovery now, and we need it quickly that addresses all sectors of the island, from education to healthcare to housing to the electric grid and beyond. I've worked with many of our friends here today in those goals. We need to think of the people of Puerto Rico during this time, whether they be seniors, students, teachers, parents, workers, or more. The needs are great, and the supplementals should be used to address those issues. A couple of areas I would like to note are the need to ensure the resiliency of the electric grid as it reconstructed, something many of us agree on, but has not been fully committed by the administration. I would hope, and I know Nydia and I and others are trying to, and Joe Crowley are trying to accomplish this, that when the electric grid is built, it's simply not repaired. Repairing it, I know that's a horrible statement for me to make in a way, because I've got electricity in my house in the Bronx and here in Washington, and there are people who say, I'll take electricity in any way. But my message to them is, if it takes another week and we could begin to work on a power grid that is for the future, that makes Puerto Rico stronger than it was, then we could be looking at saving ourselves a lot of headache and a lot of pain in the future. I would also note the needs of students, loan borrowers in Puerto Rico, of which There are nearly 300,000, almost 10% of the population. I work with our friends at the AFT to write to Secretary DeVoe and demand that she help with student loan borrowers in Puerto Rico, which number 300,000 or 10%, to notify them in English and Spanish of current benefits they're eligible for and help place them in forbearance or deferment, and to retroactively and automatically enroll student loan holders in interest-free student loan so these individuals do not accrue interest on the principal of their loan while they cope with the aftermath of the storm. But to be clear, we cannot give one hand and take away with the other. The GOP tax scam bill conference in these days has provisions that would do serious damage to Puerto Rico's economy. Both bills contain provisions that would penalize corporate subsidiaries who do business on the island, because these businesses are considered foreign for tax purposes. We should be working towards equality for Puerto Rico, including in the tax code. The easiest way to fix this is to simply treat these corporations as domestic, as operating in the United States, which in reality is what they're doing. Let me close by this. In my 27 years in Congress, one of the arguments I've always made is, why do we treat the territories differently? And I get two comments. One is because they're not a state, and the other one is because we have no money. I remember during Obamacare, I asked, why isn't Puerto Rico being treated equally? He says, we're running out of money. I said, if I remember how we put Obamacare together, it was present a bill, and then we'll figure out how to pay for it, or if we can't pay for it. There was no set limit to leave Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, or the territories out. So I think that it's also on the territories to be more proactive in reminding the United States Congress of the history between the territories and what they've given. As Nydia well said, and I'll close with this, because I wore the uniform of the United States Army during, it was wartime, but I was not involved in the war. I was stationed, where would they send Puerto Ricans? To Alaska, right? I mean, it was, adjusting to the weather was a great accomplishment, but I did it. When it comes to wartime, we're equal. But we also want to be equal when we're doing tax work and doing other issues. Thank you.
One important area in rebuilding Puerto Rico is the education system. So education cannot be an afterthought. And here we have a great leader, national leader, Randy Weingarten, president of the American Federation of Teachers. Welcome.
So I'm here to say amen to everything that has already been said. But I represent one of the fastest growing unions in the United States, which includes 40,000 teachers and retirees from Puerto Rico who affiliated with our union on August 3rd. And I've been in the island, or on the island, twice since Maria, and I'm going back a third time the week before Christmas. And what Representative Crowley said is so true. The kind of, conversations about sympathy and, oh my God, we have to do something. Kids who I taught at Clara Barton in Brooklyn, New York, and there are a lot of New York Congress people here, they understood that you don't just talk the talk, you walk the walk. And walking the walk means, just like after Katrina, just like after Sandy, just like after 9/11, today is December 7th, just like after Pearl Harbor, you walk the walk to help American citizens recreate their lives and use these kind of tragedies as opportunities to recreate and re-envision an island. And the opposite is happening in the Congress, the Republican-controlled Congress in these United States of America. And that is why all of us have to be out there shouting from the rooftops. In education in itself, what we've seen, and Lizette, who you're going to hear from in a minute, is one of those examples. Lizette Jimenez Fosse, whose classroom I was in and whose school I was in the last time I was there. What you see is that teachers are now the front line in not only getting on their hands and knees and cleaning up the mold themselves so that schools could reopen, but they are working in classrooms without electricity and without safe, reliable water. They who have not had a raise in 10 years and have had their retirement cut, have been buying water for their students. And what we realized, we said, wait a second, what can we actually do? Yes, we've done the work to petition Secretary DeVos. And yes, we're trying to get books and supplies, but what else can we do? So we worked with Operation Blessings, with the Hispanic Federation, with several other unions, and ourselves to create Operation Agua, to actually get water filter systems, some as cost as little as $30 a filter, a gravity-based filter, so we could get them into schools so that kids in the morning could have reliable, safe drinking water. And we have raised $1.3 million already for this. We've gotten thousands of filters down to the island already. We've worked with the maritime unions in doing this, and we worked with the maritime industry. And one of those places, right before Thanksgiving, was 400 schools serving 125,000 students, including one of the schools, or the school that Lizette is in. My point is, people in this season are doing what we can. Millions of dollars has been contributed by ordinary American citizens to help in Puerto Rico. That needs to be matched big time by the American government. Throwing towels at people is not what Puerto Ricans or people in the Virgin Islands need. They need a Marshall Plan. They need investment in terms of schools. They need investment in terms of industry. They need a tax code that is aligned with that. They need investment in terms of the electric grid. And they need to be told that people should stay on the island. Not telling people that we should use Katrina as a model for education, which every single school teacher knows means that all the school teachers in New Orleans were fired after Katrina. That's part of the reason that people are leaving the island. We need to keep young people in the island. And this is not the only place I have testified about that. I was just at the PROMESA board on Monday. We are supporting Nydia and Bernie Sanders' bill on the Marshall Plan. We will use our union's clout and voice to shout in every way possible, because the islanders are American citizens, both on the Virgin Islands and in Puerto Rico, and they should be treated as American citizens. But first and foremost, we need to start with making sure that the humanitarian effort to get electricity, to get food, to get water to people on the island is done. That is what we would do in Florida. That is what we would do in Texas. That is what we did in New York after Sandy. That is what we must do in Puerto Rico. And without further ado, let me introduce Lizette Jimenez Fosse, whose classroom was amazing. She actually taught me Spanish in that classroom as she was teaching kids English. We'll talk a little bit about what's happening in Puerto Rico.
Thank you. Let me take my glasses. It's not because my age. Buenos días. Good morning. My name is Lizette Jimenez Fosse, and I am an elementary school teacher at Escuela Ángeles Pastor in San Juan, Puerto Rico. I teach English as a second language to 3rd to 5th grade students. I have been a teacher, proud teacher, for 27 years, including 50 years at my current school. Never in my life have I seen such devastation as I did after the hurricane that hit my hometown. I personally have the experience of using my body to hold a door closed for 6 hours, people, for 6 hours, straight to keep water from entering and destroying my personal property. I'm sorry. It was the longest and most dreadful day of my entire life. Even though the hurricane hit 2.5 months ago, my house is still in the dark after the sun sets. Many power lines are still on the ground, and the streets are still filled with debris. We still lack traffic lights, so there are more car accidents. Roads are still severely damaged. The bridges are torn apart. Another heavy structural damage is still part of our daily lives. We have a completely different geography than we did the day before the hurricane hit. The school where I teach, Angeles Pastor, reopened 2 weeks after the hurricane, but many of my students missed school and continue to miss school even now because they do not have basic resources like clean clothes or usable materials. The school building has severe structural damage like broken lights, collapsed ceilings, and broken fences. Also in my school, the water pumps have been just off because the electricity comes and goes frequently. Also, our troops and first responders have aided us tremendously. We still have many short and long-term needs. Unfortunately, more than 2 months after the hurricane hit our island, things are not even close to back to normal. We have major challenges in my beautiful Puerto Rico. And any of us, our asking is that you treat citizens of the island as you will any other citizens of the United States after an unexpected natural disaster like that. The Puerto Rican population sees the situation as an opportunity to migrate to the mainland, where children's education is not being affected. Things are far from getting back to normal, and that is affecting our children. Many schools are closed due to unrepairable damages, and others have inconsistent water and power services. We need to make sure that our schools are open and operating safely, guys. Schools are stepping stones for the future generations. They are where children and their families feel safe, can eat meals, and can return to the simple normalcy of learning. We have gotten great support from the AFT and Operation Agua, making sure that school and homes have clean water. But what we need is our government to invest in our island just as it would invest in Florida or Texas to repair and rebuild the island so that we can all enjoy Puerto Rico. And its vast beauty. And so school can focus on teaching and nurturing children. And all of Puerto Rico can be a vibrant and grateful place to live again. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisette. We see you, we hear you, we will fight until we bring justice to the people of Puerto Rico, particularly our children. So now, a great leader, labor leader, someone who has been in the forefront in fighting for workers' rights and justice for all Americans, Hector Figueroa, president of 32BJ.
I want first to thank our workers who came here from Puerto Rico, Lisette, Ada, and Sarah. You're going to hear from them in a minute. It is incredibly painful and difficult what our families, our friends, these workers are going through. And it is really a great opportunity we have this morning to bring attention to the need for Congress to take action. Because action is needed. What has been done for Puerto Rico thus far has been insufficient. It is not nearly enough at all for the needs of the island. I want to thank Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez, Congressman Jose Serrano, all the members of Congress who have been here today. But we need much more than their efforts or the efforts that have been happening down on the island of Puerto Rico, where people with great sacrifice, with great effort, are trying to rebuild their lives. It is time for Congress, it is time for the U.S. to do what is right for the American citizens of Puerto Rico. Our union, the Service Employees International Union, with over 2 million workers, we have also members in Puerto Rico. Members who work in the schools that Lisette and Randy are talking about, who do maintenance work. Members who work in the healthcare system. Members who work in factories and municipal governments. And what we hear from them, and you're going to hear directly from them as well, is that the needs of the island are enormous. The devastation is overwhelming. Now, you may say, have we the capacity in the U.S. to do what is right? And the answer to that is yes. Have we done it before? And the answer to that is yes, too. And you don't need to go to Katrina. You don't need to go even as far as other hurricanes. For Puerto Rico, the U.S. government took responsibility and created a reconstruction agency after 2 devastating hurricanes destroyed the island in the 1930s. And they did it in cooperation with the private sector. They did it in cooperation with the labor movement. They did it by unleashing the power of Puerto Ricans to reimagine and reinvent themselves. And what we need to do today is exactly the same. That's why we support the efforts for the Marshall Plan that has been alluded here today. Elizabeth Warren, Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez, many others are supporting that. We believe that only that kind of an investment can take us where we need to go. We also support the parity on health care, because Puerto Rico needs health care now more than ever. And we support reimagining how Puerto Rico can rebuild with sustainable energy, with sustainable jobs, and with the relationship with the U.S. that allows the island to grow and to be able to develop in order to meet its obligations in the future. But we are also warning Congress that efforts to attach conditions, as we're hearing today, that fundamentally suffocate the people of Puerto Rico, its economy, its creative spirit, and will depopulate the island, are not going to be acceptable. We cannot accept support during this disaster in a way that will destroy our country. Puerto Rico is a territory of the U.S. We need to act as it is a territory of the U.S. and not ignore its needs and put conditions that are simply impossible to be met. I want to acknowledge the work of our members. Our sister local, 1199, has sent nurses, doctors, personnel to the island to assist at this moment when the resources were not there sufficiently to address the needs of the population. Our local 32BJ has been assisting the Puerto Rican people and raising funds and organizing our community from Orlando all the way to Boston to make sure that our voices are heard. But nothing can be more compelling than listening to the workers themselves, the people of Puerto Rico. So I'd like to call Ada Quiñones, who is a pharmacist technician at the Centro Médico de Puerto Rico, so you can hear directly from her. And I'd like also her to come along, Sara Huerta, who is a retired he's a doctor and retired professor for the University of Puerto Rico, so they can describe to you firsthand why we need to act now, because it's a matter of life and death for Puerto Rico. And this is why we are so passionate this morning, because we cannot allow Congress to simply not fulfill this obligation, to simply not meet the needs of the time and abandon our people. So Ada and Sarah.
Buenos días, mi nombre es Ada Quiñones y por 21 años he ejercido como técnica de farmacia en el Centro Médico de Puerto Rico.
Good morning, my name is Ada Quiñones, and for the last 21 years, I have worked as a pharmacy technician at the Puerto Rico Medical Center.
El Centro Médico de Puerto Rico es el principal centro de medicina terciaria y supraterciaria del país.
The Medical Center of Puerto Rico is the main center of tertiary and supra-tertiary medicine in the country.
La mitad de la población del país es beneficiaria del plan de salud gubernamental.
Half of the country's population is a beneficiary of the government health plan.
Por lo tanto, las más delicadas emergencias médicas en Puerto Rico son atendidas en el centro médico, ya sea porque los pacientes acuden directamente o porque son referidos de hospitales privados, después de estabilizados. Aunque privados, debido a que no cuentan con los especialistas ni con los equipos médicos necesarios para atender sus casos, particularmente en las áreas de ortopedia y neurología.
Therefore, the most delicate medical emergencies that occur in Puerto Rico are treated at the medical center, either because the patients come directly by themselves or because they are referred from private hospitals, because the hospitals do not have the specialists or the medical equipment necessary to attend to their cases, especially in cases of orthopedic or neurological cases.
Antes del paso de los huracanes Irma y María, carecía del personal profesional necesario para atender la situación de salud del país. Ya el hospital estaba sobrepoblado, con pacientes de las Islas Vírgenes y el Caribe, tras el paso del huracán Irma.
Even before Hurricanes Irma and Maria hit Puerto Rico, the medical center lacked the professional staff necessary to address the health situation of the country. The hospital was already overcrowded from patients coming from the Virgin Islands and the Caribbean after Hurricane Irma.
Esta situación de falta de personal profesional se agravó a raíz de la catástrofe causada en el país por los huracanes Irma y María.
The lack of professional personnel was aggravated as a result of the catastrophe caused in the country by Hurricanes Irma and Maria.
Para colmo de males, hubo una emigración significativa de personal profesional de la salud del centro médico a Estados Unidos, huyendo de la emergencia nacional y de la catástrofe.
To make matters worse, there was a significant emigration of professional health personnel from the medical center to the United States, fleeing the national emergency and the catastrophe.
Ejemplo de esa emigración del personal profesional de los casos en farmacia en centro médico, donde renunciaron 7 empleados entre farmacéuticos y asistentes de farmacia para buscar mejor suerte en Estados Unidos. De laboratorio central renunciaron 8 tecnólogos y de seguridad hay 39 vacantes.
An example of the emigration of professional staff in the case of the medical center pharmacy is where 7 pharmacists and pharmacy assistants resigned to look for better luck. In the laboratory, 8 technologists resigned as well. In the security team, there are 39 vacancies.
No hubo plan de contingencia para evento catastrófico de esta magnitud, y el personal del centro médico que estaba de turno tuvo que pernoctar por 4 o 5 días en el hospital, sin poder informarse de la situación por la que atravesaban sus familiares y las condiciones de sus viviendas tras el paso del huracán María.
There was no effective contingency plan for a catastrophe event of this magnitude, and the situation forced the medical center staff who were on duty the night of the hurricane to spend 4 to 5 days without being able to communicate with their families or to assess the conditions of their own homes.
Con el colapso del sistema de energía eléctrica del país, las salas de operaciones tenían que alumbrarse en los primeros días con los propios celulares de los empleados, poniendo en riesgo la seguridad de ellos y de los pacientes.
With the collapse of the country's electrical power system, the operating rooms had to be lit in the first days with employees' own cell phones, putting both them and the patients at risk.
FEMA agudizó la situación con la medida de confiscar las provisiones de primera necesidad, necesarias para afrontar la emergencia.
FEMA worsened the situation by confiscating the first aid provisions that were necessary to face this emergency.
La falta de energía eléctrica total en las primeras semanas ocasionó la condensación de los conductos de los acondicionadores de aire, que mantenían peligrosamente el piso mojado en áreas neurálgicas como la sala de emergencia, sala de operaciones y el centro de trauma, ocasionando caídas de empleados y familiares de pacientes.
The total loss of electrical power in the first few weeks caused the condensation of air conditioner ducts, which dangerously kept the floor wet in vital areas like the emergency room, the operating room, and the trauma center. This caused both employees and patient family members to fall.
Como el problema de falta de electricidad es constante, ya que el sistema eléctrico es inestable, la planta de emergencia tarda en activarse, poniendo en riesgo pacientes en ventiladores o aquellos que estén operando en el momento.
Because of the electricity that is still unreliable to this day, every time there is a power outage, patients on ventilators or that are going through surgery are immediately put into dangerous situations because the generators do not immediately come on.
Debido a la crisis en el país, aumentó el número de deambulantes en los predios del centro médico, ya que normalmente se convierte en un refugio para los que ya tenemos en el área metropolitana, situación que se agravó con lo que comenzaron a llegar de otros pueblos y regiones del país.
Due to the crisis in the country, there was an increase in the number of homelessness and number of homeless people on the medical center's premises, which normally became a refuge for those people in the metropolitan area, a situation that has worsened when others from other cities and other regions of the country came to the area.
Definitivamente, Puerto Rico requiere de una atención especial por parte de las instancias de poder de Estados Unidos, por ser una posesión colonial estadounidense, mediante una erogación presupuestaria significativa que nos ayude a atender esta grave situación catastrófica que atravesamos.
Because it is a colonial possession, Puerto Rico definitely needs special attention from the powers that be of the United States. A significant budget disbursement is needed that will make Puerto Rico whole and address the needs after the catastrophe that we are still going through.
Me parece que no debe esperarse menos de la responsabilidad de Estados Unidos con la posesión territorial de Puerto Rico ante esta emergencia nacional que se ha convertido en una crisis humanitaria.
I believe that we should not expect anything less than the full responsibility of the United States, which it owes because Puerto Rico is a territorial possession and faces this national emergency that has become a humanitarian crisis.
Gracias a todos.
Thank you very much to everyone.
Good morning. My name is Sara Huertas Goldman. I am a physician. As was said, I deeply appreciate this opportunity to address you today. Although I'm not a member of SEIU, I almost feel like a member because we have been working together in advocacy, both in health and in education in Puerto Rico for more than a decade. I'm here representing the Multisectoral Council in Puerto Rico's health system that was created by Law 235. And I must recognize Senator Batia, who then, as president of the Senate, made this possible and supported the role of civil society organizations in working together with the government to advocate for health. I'm not here today to ask for help for my own sector or for any other individual sector in the council. I represent the collective, and we are here for Puerto Rico. Congresswoman Velazquez, thank you for standing with Puerto Rico, and Congressman Serrano, who was just here, as well as all the other representatives and all of you. I get really optimistic when I hear the words that you have spoken today. Now more than ever, Puerto Ricans need to be heard by the Congress and the world. Although hurricane season is behind us, you have heard that the humanitarian crisis caused by these deadly storms is not. It's in our everyday lives. I experienced the impact of this storm personally and professionally. My compatriots breathe the impact of this storm as they inhale fumes coming from generators, keeping many of our homes with power. Many of my fellow Puerto Ricans now have respiratory illnesses that have been caused or aggravated by air pollution. The current crisis has exacerbated problems in public health functions, such as lack of information about water and air quality, infectious diseases, environmental and occupational hazards. We already know that mortality in general, using available data, has recently increased in Puerto Rico, including deaths by suicide. Prior to Hurricanes Irma and Maria, our island, as well as the U.S. Virgin Islands, faced severe healthcare funding challenges because of the capped federal Medicaid funding that has not been enough to cover the cost of care. These storms have made a bad situation much worse. Our fight for recovery, however, is not over. The actions proposed by Congresswoman Velazquez are absolutely necessary to prevent the deepening of the health crisis we are experiencing on the island and to avoid further fatalities. Moving beyond immediate needs, Puerto Rico needs parity, as was said, in Medicaid and Medicare funds, and also a role in reconstructing our healthcare system. Today, I want to urge Congress not to forget Puerto Rico. Our island seems like it's a world away, but what's happening in Puerto Rico could happen in other parts of the United States. And while Congress debates tax breaks for the wealthy, for which there is no real deadline, we need action now to address the real emergencies, life and death emergencies. Puerto Ricans are your fellow Americans. You must include the people of Puerto Rico, integrating civil society groups, such as the one I represent, in all aspects of the recovery process. And together, we can end the humanitarian crisis in Puerto Rico. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, you have seen the real faces, victims of what's going on in Puerto Rico. Thank you, Ada, and thank you, Sarah. Now, the Puerto Rican diaspora has played an important role not only in raising the voices of our community in the mainland, but being active participant leaders, whether it's raising money, whether it's knocking on doors of members of Congress, whether it's using their skills and abilities so that we keep the Puerto Rican crisis, the humanitarian crisis, in the front burner of everything that is going on here in Washington. So we have with us a co-founder of the Boricua Activate, Federico de Jesus, who has been very active in raising the profile during this legislative session here in Congress. So with you, Federico de Jesus.
Buenos días, muchas gracias, y gracias a ustedes por ustedes que estamos aquí. So thank you, Whip Hoyer, Congresswoman Velasquez, Congressman Crowley, Serrano, Neal, Ms. Weingarten, Mr. Figueroa, and our distinguished guest from Puerto Rico. I also want to recognize the co-founder of Boricua Activate, Janice Fuentes, and the former Senate President and current Senate Minority Leader of Puerto Rico, Darlo Batia, our good friend. And as Congresswoman Velasquez mentioned, the diaspora is very active. And this is why I'm here. Puerto Rico is facing a perfect storm. You've all heard of Hurricanes Maria, Irma, and the island's fiscal and economic crises. The latest congressionally provoked storm could be far worse. At stake are 250,000 U.S. citizen jobs in Puerto Rico if the GOP tax legislation becomes law in either the House or the Senate versions. Why is this the case? Contrary to popular belief, manufacturing, not tourism, manufacturing represents almost 50% of Puerto Rico's gross domestic product. These are good-paying jobs that create economic activity. Most of these companies are U.S. manufacturing companies operating on U.S. soil. By changing the rules and not addressing the unique situation that is Puerto Rico, Congress would once again be inflicting severe harm to the island's economy. The sad part is that we've been here before. It is a nightmare deja vu for Puerto Rico. And the reason is simple. Back in the 1990s, Congress faced a similar debate. The Congress wanted to balance the budget, and it targeted Section 936 of the Internal Revenue Code, which was the economic motor of Puerto Rico. And when it eliminated it, the U.S. Treasury didn't receive those revenues, but the companies went overseas to Ireland and Singapore. Puerto Rico lost 100,000 jobs. And this is one of the root causes, if not the most important cause, of Puerto Rico's financial crisis that we face today. So now I'm sorry about that. Congress would once again do away with what is left of American manufacturing incentives in Puerto Rico. Only this time the consequences would be far greater. Why would Congress want to kick a man while he's down? Puerto Rico still has over half of its population without electricity, tens of thousands of Puerto Ricans without drinking water, and an economy and fiscal infrastructure in chatters. Now is not the time to hurt Puerto Rico. It is time to help it lift itself by its own bootstraps, as Puerto Ricans have done before. If Congress passes this tax bill without addressing the irreparable harm it would do to Puerto Rico, it will be putting the last nail in the coffin of what is left of Puerto Rico's economy. We did have in the Senate tax bill, Senators Nelson and Menendez introduced an amendment to prevent this harm from Puerto Rico. We wish that the diaspora in Florida call the other senator from Florida and let him know that his party has at stake here the future of Puerto Rico and that he also gets involved. So Senator Rubio, if you're watching, please help us. The more than 5 million other Puerto Ricans in the U.S., or all U.S. citizens, are watching. If this bill becomes law, we will not forget. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much.
Gracias. Thank you, Federico. Thank you. Yeah. I would like to acknowledge Senator Eduardo Batia, he is the former president of the Puerto Rican Senate, who is here reaching out to members of Congress. So if you have any question.
I have some very specific tax questions that maybe I'm better off asking after.
Sure. Okay. Well, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Do you have a